We cannot live without meaning. Viktor Frankl reminded us after his nightmare in concentration camps, where his whole family was tortured and killed. We humans cannot live without meaning. To find the meaning of life and of our own life is to find the reason we exist and never forget it the rest of our lives. It is to find the why of life, why we give our lives to anything. For us, and for us human beings of faith and no faith, actually, the meaning of life is right here in these words. It is told by way of stories one after another, up to and including the story of Jesus of Nazareth, his remarkable life, his tragic death, and what happened after his death that reveals the meaning of his life and each of our lives, and the truth for humanity itself. Yes, there is meaning to life, to our sufferings, to our joys, to our failures, to our successes, our dreams, our desires, each and all, there is meaning. It is all going somewhere, and it is all being woven together into something valuable and good. We trust that to be true. Jesus is a meaning maker, the meaning maker par excellence. And on this Corpus Christi Sunday, we celebrate Mass, but we also celebrate the Mass. And we do it in word and we do it in gesture. What he asked us to do, to remember the meaning of his life, but also to remember at the beginning of every new week, to be reminded of the meaning of our own lives. He asked us to do this to remember the meaning of his life and also to remember the meaning of ours. Just one example of many facets of this diamond that is the Eucharist that I get asked about periodically. Why I hold up the host so high when I break it. For me and for us, I hope, for all of us, it's the central gesture of the Eucharist. We are told that this is a reminder of how his body was broken. His body was broken for us, and how we can find him now in the broken places of our own lives. And this is the meaning of our own lives. To be broken and to be given, to be broken and to be given for others' sake. And this is the name for the Mass for centuries from its beginning. As Scripture describes it, they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. And on this Father's Day, I celebrate the deep truth of our dads who, like Jesus, are meaning makers for us all. Meaning making designates the process by which people interpret situations, events, objects, conversations in the light of their previous knowledge and experience. Meaning making is the process of how people construe, understand, make sense of life events, relationships, and even our own self. Our meaning making motivation allows us to interpret our inner world in the context of our external world. Meaning making goes beyond circumstance, well beyond circumstance. What I am doing or not just now, even. Because meaning making cultivates hope. It's a life trajectory we can look forward to. We have these crises all the time. Some call it this existential crises. I propose to you that that's oftentimes due to a lack of meaning, a lack of felt meaning to our lives, and a sense of purpose to our lives that's bigger than this certain circumstance. And so adopting a spiritual framework, and I see this in our young folks who are thinking about becoming Catholic and choose it even, adopting a spiritual framework, like even for somebody starting up an entrepreneurship sort of to change the world, is a meaning-making process. In fact, I think you probably know this, having a sense of purpose is one of the biggest predictors of happiness and satisfaction. It's what Jesus was doing the night before he died, and why we're doing it 2,000 years later. He was meaning-making that Passover night with a cup of wine and a piece of bread in this gathering of his own in the world. And in that moment, he passed on the meaning of his life in bread broken and a cup poured out. He passed on the meaning of his life to them so that it might perhaps become the meaning of our own. What does it mean to make meaning? Jesus made meaning here, not just for those who are his own in the world, but for us 2,000 years later. There are many reasons we gather at the beginning of each week, or we try our best to, and things have changed so much since COVID. But amongst the best and the most important is to make meaning together. Dads and sons and daughters, moms, families. To celebrate making meaning together in rituals that define us and define our purpose in life. Broken, poured out, so that we don't forget and call ourselves back to what we are for. On this Father's Day, one of the purposes of a dad's life, the very meaning of his life, is that in the breaking open of his life for his kids, and is feeding them on the flesh of his own body. And by that I mean his time and his energy and his sweat and his tears and his aggravation, feeding them on the body, the flesh of his own body. Dads are meaning makers in that, and kids never forget it. Oh, it might get buried deep in the psyche, but all of a sudden there'll be that flashback when, oh my gosh, that's what my dad did for me. 40, 50 years later. As dads live out the meaning of their life as men for others, their kids begin to experience the meaning of their life by what about him touches something deep in them. What about him that most dads don't even know, but what about him touched something deep in them? For example, kids, and especially boys, it seems, need to be able to be vulnerable if they are to succeed at love. When dad is, then they get a whiff of that, and they get a whiff of how attractive it is, even as it might be scary as hell. And then in their turn, they choose it for themselves, that vulnerability. The way they watch Dad will image for his kids the meaning of his life and theirs, be they boys or girls or even adults. And that he always did will always remind us of our dads. One of the clearest examples of meaning making from my dad, Ralph, was that the earliest memory I have of him till even to his late 90s. Every time I was there, when he went to bed, he knelt down beside his bed and said his prayers. When he was getting on to 96, it took him longer to get down on his knees and get up from his knees than it did for him to pray. But that he always did reminds me still of not just my dad, but what it's all about. And for a big old strong guy like I always saw my dad to be, muscular and blue-collar worker, and to see that big old strong guy kneeling next to his bed did something to me that had something to do with the meaning of my life. You dads, your dads, and you dads, you are meaning makers. Your behavior, your timely wisdom will help us discover the meaning of our own lives. And the way you look at us, even the way you look at us, will be the way we will find ourselves looking at our kids. Because it worked for us, for sure. But really, the way we look at everybody else will have something to do with the way you took the time to look us in the eyes and love us. It didn't have to be a ton of time. It just had to be intentional and real and carry some of the affection of your heart for us. But it's how we'll look at everybody else now. And the way you responded when we screwed up, wrecked the car, yes, yelled at our moms, your wife, yes, did or did not do our chores, the way you celebrated with us doing of the chores even, the way you handle our own failures, and actually the way we saw you handle your failures, will plant the seed in us for the same and more. Do you know that? And dads, when you die and the whole picture of your life emerges, that will be put together, when we put together after the last chapter is written of your life, when we put together all your strengths and all your weaknesses, and how you lived with both to get the whole picture of you and the meaning of your life, it all of a sudden becomes clear to us what it was all about, what you were all about, that we were not even conscious of. One of the great privileges and one of the biggest challenges of my life as a preacher is to tease that out for those gathered at your funeral, to tease out the meaning of your life from the dots that I get to, and this is challenging as well, but I get to put together, I get to connect those dots for your kids and your grandkids and the rest of your family and your coworkers. I get the privilege of connecting those dots. It's more than just funny stories about you. It's about the meaning of your life for us. To connect the dots you left us into a whole. The whole of you. And the rituals you left us to remember you. And for us now to remember the meaning of our own lives. What we are here for. The dots we will leave behind for some other preacher, some other time, that will create a picture of us for others. Yes, it's true. Finding the meaning of life is essential to the human experience, to our happiness and our satisfaction. how we work through the worst in us and the worst in our world and to our kids. Dads, you are meaning makers, whether you know it or not. For that, we can only thank you for passing on what is perhaps the best gift a kid could ever get. And do the same in our turn. All because we just cannot live without meaning. We just cannot live without meaning.